All right, it's called the Big Ugly for a reason, and it's that time in Albany. This year, uglier than usual. Now, when they say the Big Ugly, what it means is when lawmakers scramble to cut last-minute deals and to tie up loose ends. And now, just a week before the end of the session, Albany is destabilized because, well, for a lot of reasons, but including you got new guys at the helm. Republican John Flanagan, he's the new guy leading the state Senate, replacing Dean Skelos, who stepped aside due to that pesky corruption indictment. And Democrat Carl Hastie, he's the new Assembly Speaker, replacing Shelley Silver after his corruption arrest. Now Flanagan and Hastie, they got to, in effect, herd cats here as they try to scratch out deals. And Scott, in terms of experience, and people say, oh, you know, these guys are just institutionalized or whatever. It does help to have experience and to have political chits to play, especially when you're trying to always do the big ugly and get it done at the end of the day. It's not beneficial to have two complete freshmen trying to run their caucuses with all the different agendas, right?
Well, that is right. And I'm sure they're taking instructions from the former leaders, but that's not the issue. The issue is Preet Bharara. And over Albany, there is a tremendous cloud, and there was a New York Post article today that was very good. I have sources telling me things are getting closer with respect to a number of other folks that may be up there. You've got all these leaders who are not willing to go to back room anymore and talk about deals. John DeFrancisco, senator from Syracuse, talked about it today. So it's not that. There's the enormous cloud of former Moreland Commission issues that are sitting over the top of Albany, and everyone from the governor's office, from what I'm told, through the legislative chambers, are just on eggs.
So they're waiting for the next indictment or indictments to fall?
The sources tell me that there's real concern about who's going to be next and what it is, and that is put. So normally you'd be talking through, you go to lunch, you do this, and that. There's a real pall over Albany, and I don't know, I wouldn't know timing, but that's what's causing a lot of the problem up there.
Well, timing's part of the problem, Jeannie. They got to get this thing done here in the next week and a half, really. A week. They don't. You got a lot of real issues, not just Mickey Mouse stuff that are hanging out there, big social policy issues. We talked about, age as it relates to kids when they can be sentenced to adult facilities, DREAM Act. You got a bunch of stuff that's hanging out there that I've never seen it more paralyzed than this.
Yeah, and we can forget all about those issues. The DREAM Act not even going to come into play. At the most, they're going to try to tackle affordable housing if they can. The governor's push on education of the tax is, I think, dead in the water, is what we're hearing, that he's not going to get anywhere in the assembly on that. They only have 7 days left. And I agree, there is, they have come to a screeching halt because of this fear of moving forward. And you've got Bill DeBlasio, pushing the governor to do something, and the governor pushing back and saying, listen, my hands are basically tied here because I'm not going to be able to move them forward.
Well, let me, in fact, you get to exactly what Jeannie was referencing. You have the governor, obviously, and Bill DeBlasio still at each other's throats. This time, it's over those rent regulations that Jeannie mentioned. The mayor, he's asking the governor to end the 421A tax break program if he's not willing to amend it. Now, that program gives developers a tax break for building affordable housing. The mayor, he wants to raise the affordable housing requirements from 20% to 35% for developers to get the break. And so far, Cuomo is not playing ball. And the language he used, Dominic, the mayor that is, towards the governor, I thought was strong, even for, how fractured the two of them are right now, saying, if he doesn't do this, we're going to do the following. There's not even a pretense anymore that the two play well together.
It's not looking good, Richard. What's ironic, Mr. Cuomo and Mr. DeBlasio worked together at HUD in Washington at the same time. It appears with our governor, there's only room for one star, and it's either you're the star or you're not. And these guys are going at it. And the issue, we're looking at the governor now, but the issue, as pointed out by the professor and the county executive, is the U.S. attorney, Preet Bharara. The New York Times story alone today, in my opinion, is enough to indict the current speaker, the brand new speaker.
And for folks who don't know what Dominic's referencing, there is, and it seemed to me, Dom, and you know how this works, it seemed to be the setup piece to what's going to come next, which is they talked about a lot of undisclosed income where there's a real question as to sourcing for Carl Hastings.
But Richard, a first-year journalism student, I'm going to keep saying it no matter how many times Mr. Brodsky and others say it's not true. Half of Albany consists of crooks. It's that simple. There's no other way to say it. How could you not account for $150,000? How is it it's cost, I think the figure was $30,000 to repair your BMW over a 10-year period? There's enough information in that story alone today
But Andrew,
for
it all
indictments.
begs the question. Democrats, and we have some smart ones who come around this table that are in the state legislature, they knew what they were just coming out of under the cloud of Shelley Silver with no due diligence. For folks who won't remember, a week faster than they imposed on themselves, they jumped the gun for a week to basically insert this guy without any due diligence.
It wasn't about finding the cleanest candidate to run the assembly. It was about the deals and the political machinations and who's supporting who. There's another headline that came out this weekend, which is that Keith Wright, the assemblyman from the Bronx, or I believe from Harlem, is running for Charlie Rangel's congressional seat. I'll bet you all the money in my wallet versus all the money in your wallet, that was part of the deal that got Carl Hastie the Assembly Speaker's position, because Wright was in the running for a while, and they sort of did battle, and there is a portion of that congressional district that's in the Bronx, which means that Hastie would need to sign off on it before you're going to get the backing. And I guarantee you that was part of the deal that led to Hastie becoming Assembly Speaker. There was a deal that got Flanagan, the Senate leadership. That's all that these things are. It's the same in Washington, it's the same in Trenton. These are all deals about who's got support and who can help the other candidate. So it wasn't about finding Mr. Clean to fill the spot. One more thing about Cuomo and DeBlasio. That has less to do with Preet Bharara, at least in my view, than it has to do with money. You're talking about rent regulations and building developers. The single biggest contributor to the Republican Party in New York and the Democratic Party in New York is the housing industry. You know, look at where the money's gone in terms of some of these big donors to Governor Cuomo. He's got a lot of their money too. So it's not a sandbox fight. It's not a Preet Bharara fight. It's I don't want to take down this industry that has been so good to our campaign.
But in this case, oddly, DeBlasio is siding with the housing, and you've got Cuomo with labor, and that's one of the strange twists about this. Now, I'm not saying Cuomo is doing that for anything other than political reasons, but that is the strange bedfellows that have been created, as DeBlasio had his neck out for the housing
We've seen a
to
lot
keep
of those
the
kind
abatement.
of fights, Jeannie, right, with education also, in terms of picking sides of teachers union. But you know, this all comes around, Scott. I keep waiting for that aha moment where they worry that there's going to be a wave election where the folks just say a pox on all of them, even my own. It doesn't feel, that was Freudian, that while there's a lot of fear in Albany right now, they believe that there'll be a throw the bums out movement yet. You don't get the idea that there really has been that moment that's been crystallized, even though two of the three men in the room are under indictment and the governor is certainly a little nervous in the moment. That still hasn't done it. That they still think that they can do this. They just got to get past this window of time.
Yeah, and polls generally show that folks love their assembly person. They just don't like all the rest of them. And while I really don't agree with one of the finest journalists I've ever met,
I agree with him with his half the
with
number,
respect to 50-50, he is again right, because he called the speaker. He called this weeks ago because they didn't do any diligence. They were supposed to go back and ask the tough questions. Remember the closed door, the reform folks? They didn't ask the right questions, or he didn't give them the right answers. But going back to your question, I think everybody up there is like because they feel it. And you add Hastert, you add all these other things. I mean, the political system and politicians, I think, are taking a hit like they've never seen before. And if the next shoe drops, which folks say will happen in a few cases, I think you may begin to see people say, I don't care whether you were there. If you had a picture taken with Dean Skelos, I'm going to consider somebody else.
But so many of these assembly members and Senate members are in safe seats. I mean, there are so few. It's districted so that Democrats are going to win their share of seats.
But I'm saying it a different way, and I didn't do it the right way. You're right. I was the throw the bums out. That's exactly. But just seeing who's been taken down. We're not talking about some freshman from Onondaga no one had ever heard of here. You're talking about an institution with Shelley Silver. You saw before that what happened with Joe Bruno. You obviously see what happened here with Dean Skelos currently, at least with the indictments. And add on top of that, how many governors before them have gotten in trouble that you would just think the people would be living scared as hell to try anything right now because they could be next. It doesn't seem to be sticking. And even if you look at the Skelos, if you follow the case with son and dad, the brazenness that they did this with. And how many of the guys in the city, you and me both know, Dominic, that probably right now, if it's not nailed down, would try something themselves, right? Still to this day.
I refer to them as poverty pimps. That's the term that I use.
Yeah.
But I just want to correct one thing. When I say 50% in Albany are crooks, what
conservative.
No. What I actually mean by that, a little clarification, is that a first-year law student, if they just looked at their expense reports alone, that 50% and the per diem, 50% of them could be indicted, and I stand by that.
All right, well, I sure hope you're wrong here, but just to give you an idea, every time you think, you can't get a weirder story when it comes to Albany, I want you to think about this one, okay? I saw this today, and the fact is, when I read the story, nowhere was intended that this was, Exhibit A of how screwed up Albany is, or Assemblyman Andrew Hevesy, okay? By all accounts, a terrific lawmaker and a great public servant. He's pushing a new anti-corruption bill. Makes sense to me, right? And there's nothing weird about that because, well, there's tons of corruption to really go after in Albany. But I want you to think about the source for a second. All he's got to do, Junior, is take a look across the dinner table at Thanksgiving and he'll see what I mean. Andrew's father, Alan, went to prison after getting convicted for his role in a massive scandal involving the state's pension system. Alan Hevesy, the dad, was the state controller at the time, and the plot thickens. The current controller, Tom DiNapoli, he's supporting the bill that Junior's putting forward. DiNapoli, he replaced Hevesy. So if you think we go in a circle and round we go, it is not your imagination. All right. Coming up next, everyone, the police officer who took down this teenage girl at a suburb outside of Dallas at a pool party is now on leave. This case making headlines coast to coast here. We're going to tell you why we're seeing this more and more often, and not only a sign of the times, but not the good times.